Baghdad swelters in summer. The mercury hovers at 50 Celsius or more. And this year there's a cruel double whammy. Along with the searing temperatures, Ramadan decrees that most Baghdadis cannot eat or drink during daylight hours. They may crave a cool drink or even air conditioning, but there's just a few hours of electricity per day from the national grid. Here on the banks of the Tigris River, this former office block houses 70 squatter families. On the 7th floor, Ismail Muhammad Khan and his family are breaking their day-long fast. His wife, Zaheda Salem, sums up the dilemma for Iraqis.
والله هي هاي الوضعية اللي احنا عايشينها، يعني ما عندنا قدرة احنا. ما عندنا قدرة. ماكو يعني احنا نداعي بمي نظيف، ماكو مي نظيف، هو كل العراق ما بيه مي نظيف، مو بس احنا.
And with no power, it's a long climb up 7 flights.
الدرج هذا مشكلة يعني ما نقدر احنا نحلها. اي. مسواقنا عندنا علاقة وبيها حبل طويل ننزله للجوة بالشارع وبعدين يحطوه بالعلاقة واحنا نسحبه. هاي أغنى بلد بالعالم احنا. بس احنا مو يعني أفقر دولة بالعالم هسه.
Across town, the baker Basra and his staff are hard at work. Iraqi eating habits demand freshly baked bread for each meal. But Ali also struggles without power.
والله الكهرباء هنا كلش مو زينة. يعني الكهرباء تجي لها ساعة، إذا كل ساعة النهار كله بتنقطع.
زين، مأثر على شغلكم؟
طبعاً مأثر، هو شيء الرئيس الكهرباء. زين. الكهرباء ماكو. يعني لا واحد يدعمها، لا واحد شيء.
زين شلون بتشتغلون؟
والله يشتغل المولدات السحب والبنزين غالي، كاهم البنزين عن الكهرباء.
Fueling the generator is no easy matter.
يعني شغلة مثل ما تقول البنزين صعب، يعني حتى اللي يجيبونه الناس بصعوبة، لأن حتى ما بيها كهرباء.
There are private generators all over Baghdad. And this spaghetti mess of cables proves how some owners gouge neighbours for an extra buck. Adel Zaidan is another businessman trying to turn a profit. No problem, you'd think, for an ice maker in a heat wave. But he needs generators for power too.
هاي السنة تختلف عن باقي السنين. السنة الأزمة أقوى، ليش؟ لأن توفر الكهرباء ماكو. الوضع الأمني صفر. يعني جاي تلاحظ أنت بالشارع جاي تصير يوميا حالات قتل وسلب.
Aside from a depressing diet of violence, Iraqis have been waiting 7 months since elections back in March for their bickering politicians to form a government.
والله هي الظروف جاي تصير أكثريتها من تشكيل حكومة ماكو. لو اكو حكومة قوية غير توفر للشعب كهرباء ما يحتاج المعاملة الثلج.
And this is another enormous frustration for Iraqis. Their oil-rich nation cannot refine enough of the stuff to fill the Basras. They resent queuing for hours, but for now, there's no alternative. This is the easier, perhaps the safest way to move through the streets of Baghdad. If you look out the back and out the front, you'll see that we've got a police escort with an armed gunner sitting up in a turret on each vehicle. We're heading to the Dora Power Station. This is one of the classic examples of what's wrong with this country at the moment. It floats on about a quarter of the world's energy resources, but it can't energize itself. And the big question that the international community and the local leadership needs to answer is, can Iraq get its act together? And if it doesn't, what are the consequences? Even from outside, you can tell the power station is an industrial relic, demanding investment for years, but receiving little. And inside it gets worse. In fact, the creaking turbines here, starved of fuel and spare parts, crank out only half the power that was produced under Saddam.
Governance system in turbine valve.
I'm given a guided tour by Sinan Taha, now an engineer. He was a mere student back when Saddam was deposed. Given the state of this place, it's hard to imagine that the US has spent $5 billion on restoring power in Iraq. 200 million of it here at Dora.
التأهيل شركات أجنبية، يعني شركات راجلنا رصينة مثل سيمنز، جنرال إلكتريك. لحد الآن يعني قاعد تصير مشكلة بالعقود أو رفض الشركات بسبب الوضع الأمني، يعني ما تقبل تحضر هنا بالعراق تشتغل.
And here in the antiquated nerve centre, there's not much to do, and not much that the engineers and technicians can do to boost the paltry power load. Taha tells me Iraq's rampant corruption is another reason his power plant can't deliver.
والله أنا تخيلت ليش، بسبب إحنا عندنا من جو الأمريكان يعني الشركة بكر تأهيل، بس فساد إداري بالعقود، يعني بس مجرد صورة، يعني اليونتات ظلت يعني ما تحسنت كفاءتها ولا زيدونا بكفاءتها.
We're on the highway south from Baghdad, driving to the holy cities of Karbala and Najaf. But look at these walls, look at these communities. The entire community is blast-walled against the rest of the world. And notwithstanding that, there are killings on a daily basis in there, bodies are found in the streets. The new Iraq is still a very insecure place. The armed convoy we're travelling with is part of the Iraq Oil Police, a heavily armed force of 5,000 whose job is to protect 7,500 kilometres of oil pipeline and the nation's vital oil installations.
يعني أنابيب ممتدة من البصرة منها. شوف هاي أنواع الأنابيب.
Our journey started following a briefing from the man who commands this oil army, Major General Hamid Abdullah Ibrahim.
وهي تمثل وجودها يعني لحماية القطاع النفطي اللي هو يمثل عصب الاقتصاد العراقي، ولذلك أحس أقدس واجب أدي وطني اتجاه حماية القطاع النفطي.
We want to see what the General calls the central nervous system. And I explain in an interview with the Sydney radio station why that system has broken down. There are a whole lot of reasons. During the worst of the insurgency periods, the whole grid system and the power stations were targets for insurgency bombings. The whole Soon Iraq's endless desert begins to unfold before us. When will this be put in the ground? Major Gassab is in charge of the pipeline security in this area. Major Gassab's job is to protect what generally is not seen. You've got these mounds of earth out here which tell us there's 4 strands of the strategic pipeline buried there. We can actually get a sense of it today because they're building this extra capacity pipeline here. He's got about 600 men, he's got about 200 kilometers of this vital asset for the Iraqi economy, and they've got to protect it. They've got to protect it against smugglers, they've got to protect it against insurgency and terrorist strikes. With the pipes 2 meters underground, here is the obvious target. A pressure valve. And this is Major Gassab's worst nightmare, the results of an insurgent strike on a pipeline. Terrorist attacks like this were once common, but to oil police commanders like Brigadier Abdul Karim Salem, smuggling is now a greater threat.
العمليات الإرهابية ما كان أن تقوم لولا سرقة النفط. يعني أهم شيء الغاية من عمليات سرقة النفط هي لتمويل العمليات الإرهابية.
The Brigadier is either remarkably courageous talking about his job, or he's just playing crackers. He doesn't mince words when it comes to his bureaucratic bosses. He says they are political appointees, describing them off camera as stupid oil thieves.
يعني تقريبا الرجل المناسب بالمكان المناسب ما ماشي عندنا هاي الشغله. يعني موجود الفساد المالي والاداري، موجود وجود الفساد المالي والاداري. زين؟ والمحسوبيه ايضا فوقها.
Back at the pipeline, Major Gassab is not concerned about bureaucrats right now. He prefers to dwell on the dream of Iraq's future. Right. But this is part of the dream to produce 12 million barrels a day.
هذا جزء من الحلم انه يزيد الانتاج 12. طبعا part of the dream.
حلم العراق هذا.
It's all Iraqi dream.
It's a big dream.
بس كون نحصل فلوس بجيبنا تصير يعني.
But we should get money.
The dream may be just that. Western diplomats in Baghdad say 12 million barrels a day is pie in the sky. They reckon the Iraqis simply aren't up to achieving a 5-fold increase on current production levels. Today we're heading south to Basra, a high-speed run across the broiling desert. We see the first of the flares, the Dante-esque markers which signal that under this barren surface lie untapped riches. Billions of barrels of oil and natural gas too. And there's other telltale signs, an increasing number of oil tankers thundering along the highway. Basra is dry and dusty. The legacy of war is not hard to find. But this town is about to boom with new hotels, a hospital financed by the Saudis, a water treatment plant, electricity generation, and of course, foreign investors. The good times can't come soon enough for Basra's mayor, Mr. Jabir. Angry crowds rioted here in June over power outages and a lack of clean water. One demonstrator was killed, and insurgent attacks continue.
في الآونة الأخيرة رغم العمليات الأمنية ورغم بعض الخروقات، لكن تتمتع البصرة باستقرار أمني كبير، مما أدى إلى جذب عدد كبير من الشركات، ومنها الشركات العالمية في جولة التراخيص النفطية الأولى والثانية والثالثة. نعم.
These nationally televised oil license auctions drew all the big players in the oil game: Europe, Russia, China, South America. But there was also a big surprise. US companies have substantial existing contracts, but they won just one of the major new licenses on offer from Baghdad.
Well, I cannot really explain why, but what is significant is that this proves that the Iraqi government did not really, deliver Iraqi wealth on a golden plate to any company.
And here's part of the glittering prize for the oil companies. One of the last great oil bonanzas left on the planet, Rumaila, the world's second biggest oil field. It's literally hard to comprehend the volumes of oil that BP Iraq boss Michael Townsend and I are striding over here.
This field is truly a gigantic scale. Its footprint is 20 kilometres wide, but it's 80 kilometres long. And underneath the ground we're standing on here are a number of reservoirs. There's 4 or 5 really major reservoirs. Since the 1950s, most of the oil has only been produced from one of those reservoirs.
This one reservoir has provided billions of barrels of oil and currently produces 1 million barrels a day. BP and their Chinese and Iraqi partners plan to bring that up to 3 million barrels a day. That's what the oil men call a supergiant field, second only to Saudi Arabia's mega Ghawar field. Back in the Baghdad office, it's time to file to the Herald in Sydney. But with the sort of oil riches we've just seen, Iraq's future would seem assured. But with no government or legislation to rev up this creaking industry and to divide the spoils fairly, what price the great dream of oil wealth and prosperity for this war-scarred nation? Tamir Gadban is a former oil minister and now energy advisor to the government. The people of Iraq, when you talk to them, seem to be almost contemptuous of the ability of people like yourself to make this dream become a reality and for them to get some benefit from it.
Well, I don't blame any Iraqi if it's being, if you look at it in a contemptuous way and or he doesn't believe it, because they went through very, very difficult, times.
Granted, Iraq has suffered 3 wars since 1980, 13 years of UN sanctions, and the collapse of the entire system post the fall of Saddam. But now, new laws setting out how to distribute the vast oil wealth of the country are stuck in the parliament.
There will be a committee or a commission to be formed, and there's also a draft law for that already, to be done.
But this law has not been enacted?
No. I cannot really defend, any record, any failing. I believe it is possible to reach consensus, even if we amend the draft in one way or another.
More delay is not what this man wants. Oil Minister Hussein al-Shahristani has come to a media dinner in Baghdad. It runs into a very frustrated mess. Shahristani faces the almost impossible task of kick-starting the resurrection of Iraq's oil industry, while the squabbling factions cannot agree on who should govern the country. He's also acting electricity minister, and he was embarrassed by yet another blackout here, which threw his guests into darkness. At a post-dinner press conference, I was keen to ask him why, of all the IOCs, the international oil companies, the big US companies had missed out on new contracts.
No, that's not true. As a matter of fact, all the major IOCs, and mostly they are American companies, both ExxonMobil, British Petroleum is more American than British now, and so on, have actually signed oil contracts.
But the minister figures he must placate different audiences. He addresses Iraqi disquiet about any American involvement when he sings a very different tune in Arabic to the local media.
الآن قبل قليل كان التلفزيون الأسترالي يسألني تفسير غياب الشركات الأمريكية الكبرى عن العقود النفطية العراقية. هذا دليل الحقيقة رغم ما كل ما كان يشاع بأن الأمريكان جاءوا ليأخذوا نفط العراق، لأن العقود النفطية لم تذهب إلى الشركات الأمريكية. وإذا كان للسياسة تأثير لكان نلحظها في هذا المجال. بخصوص
The Iraqis say they've negotiated the world's best terms for the sale of their oil, and analysts agree. While his guests continue their feast, the minister slips into the night. The lights may stay on here for a few more hours, but this jolly little party is a far cry from the reality of daily living for millions of Iraqis. A life without power, spent wondering if they will ever benefit from their nation's wondrous treasure trove of oil and